8 nations tried to solve the same problem during the Cold War. Put the magazine behind the trigger, and you get a shorter rifle with a longer barrel. Here is every Cold War bullpup that came out of that idea. Starting with the bullpups that actually made it into service, the ones that passed every test an army could throw at them and ended up in soldiers' hands. FAMAS F1 entered French service in 1978 and became one of the first bullpups adopted by a major Western military. It fires from a lever-delayed blowback system, which means a pair of levers slow down the bolt so the cartridge case has time to lose pressure before the chamber opens. The trade-off was that the lever system was sensitive to variations in ammunition pressure, which meant the FAMAS was picky about which brands of ammunition it would cycle reliably. France used it as their standard service rifle for over 30 years, with a revised version, the FAMAS G2, eventually adding a different magazine well to accept standard North Atlantic Treaty Organization rounds. The Steyr AUG A1 arrived in Austria in 1977 and came with something unusual already built in, a 2.5 power optical sight sitting right on top of the receiver. Most armies at that time were still issuing iron sights. The AUG also used a modular design, meaning you could swap the barrel for a shorter or longer one without special tools, and the transparent polymer magazine let the shooter see exactly how many rounds remained without counting. It went on to be adopted by Australia, New Zealand, and dozens of other countries, making it the most commercially successful bullpup of the Cold War era. The L85A1 entered British Army service in 1985 after more than 2 decades of development, and it immediately ran into problems. Early production models were prone to jamming, especially in sand and cold weather, which became a serious issue during the Gulf War in 1991. Part of the problem was that the bullpup layout placed the ejection port very close to the shooter's face, so any debris entering the action had almost no distance to travel before it reached the bolt. Heckler & Koch was brought in to redesign the internals, and the fixed version, the L85A2, became a reliable weapon that served well into the 2000s. Next, the bullpups that came close. Rifles that passed military trials, impressed the engineers who tested them, and then got cancelled for reasons that had nothing to do with how well they shot. The British EM2 was actually adopted by the United Kingdom in 1951, making it the first bullpup to be officially accepted by any army. It lasted less than a year. What made the EM2 unusual was its cartridge, an intermediate round called the .280 British that sat between a pistol round and a full rifle round in power, which was exactly the kind of ammunition the United States did not want as a North Atlantic Treaty Organization standard. Britain needed American cooperation more than it needed a new rifle, so the adoption was cancelled, and the bullpup service weapon had to wait another 30 years. Singapore tested a bullpup configuration for the Steyr AUG program in the early 1980s, exploring whether the compact layout suited the tight urban environments that dominated Singapore's defense thinking. The key engineering question was whether shortening the overall weapon length would be worth the ergonomic changes that come with moving the magazine behind the trigger in a small, densely populated country with no strategic depth. The bullpup version was evaluated, but the production contract went to a conventional configuration instead, partly because training costs for a completely new manual of arms were considered too high for a force that was still building its doctrine. Singapore later developed the full bullpup SAR-21 in the 1990s, drawing directly on what those early trials had revealed. The VAAL-TER VA-2000 was a West German semi-automatic sniper rifle that used the bullpup layout to fit a long fluted barrel into a package short enough for a police officer to carry in a vehicle. A fluted barrel has grooves cut into the outside, which reduces weight and helps it cool faster between shots. The engineering trade-off was that placing the action behind the trigger group created a trigger pull with a slightly longer reset than a conventional sniper rifle, which required users to train specifically around the feel of the mechanism. Only around 250 were ever made, because each one was assembled almost entirely by hand and cost more than most cars at the time. Soviet designer German Korobov submitted the TKB-022 to Soviet military trials in 1962, and it solved a problem most bullpups struggle with: ejecting the spent case away from the shooter's face. It used a chute system to redirect the shell casing downward and forward instead of to the right, which meant either hand could operate the rifle without modification or the risk of a hot casing hitting the shooter's cheek. The polymer construction was also unusually advanced for its era, giving the TKB-022 a weight significantly below that of the Kalashnikov it was competing against. The Soviet military ultimately chose to stay with Kalashnikov-based designs, so the TKB-022 never entered production. German Co-Robov built a series of bullpup prototypes across the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, each one refining the ideas he had started with. He competed against Mikhail Kalashnikov multiple times and lost each time, not because his designs were worse on paper, but because Soviet procurement favored weapons with established supply chains and known reliability records in the field. The interesting engineering note is that Co-Robov's designs often weighed less than the Kalashnikov and had features that Western designers would not reach for another 20 years, including ambidextrous controls and integrated optical rail systems on later prototypes. The Co-Robov prototypes now sit in Russian weapons museums, representing a path Soviet military development chose not to take. To wrap up, the weapons that came from outside the Western development track, the bullpups that China and the Eastern Bloc explored on their own terms, for their own reasons. The Type 86S was China's attempt to put Kalashnikov internals into a bullpup stock and sell the result on the export market. Taking a proven action and moving it into a new chassis sounds straightforward, but it changes the balance, the ergonomics, and the reloading sequence entirely. And on the Type 86S, the longer trigger linkage produced a noticeably mushy trigger pull that testers consistently flagged as a problem. The weapon also retained the Kalashnikov's right side ejection without modification, meaning casings exited directly past the shooter's face in the bullpup configuration, which was exactly the problem that designers like Co-Robov had spent years trying to solve. China eventually pursued bullpup design more seriously with the Type 95, which addressed the ejection issue and became their standard service rifle. Every bullpup on this list was trying to solve the same equation. Shorter rifle, same barrel length, same power. That math works. A bullpup genuinely gives you a longer barrel in a shorter package, and that matters when you are moving through vehicles, doorways, and urban terrain. The problem is that moving the magazine behind the trigger creates a chain of secondary problems. Slower reloads because your hands are farther from the magazine, ejection cases that exit near your face, and a longer trigger linkage that softens the feel of every shot. Every weapon in this video dealt with at least one of those issues. Several dealt with all three. The countries that made bullpups work, France and Austria, committed fully and built their entire training and logistics systems around the new layout from day one. The countries that hedged or tried to adapt a conventional action into a bullpup chassis mostly got the worst of both designs. The Cold War bullpup era did not prove the layout is better or worse than a conventional rifle. What it proved is that a new shape only pays off when the whole system is designed around it from the beginning. Sometimes the right design only works when you commit to it completely. Subscribe to Flashpoint Armory for more historical engineering breakdowns, new videos every week.